Hello, my name's Elijah Wells, and today's review is Mark Flanagan's new movie, Life of Chuck. Based on a short story from Stephen King from his 2020 novella, If It Bleeds, the film follows Chuck, played by Tom Hiddleston, as it basically follows his entire life from his childhood to his time in his time at school. Then eventually, and of course, when he was a somewhat humble accountant with a lot of joy in himself, then to his unfortunate death at a young age, which coincides with the end of the universe. Mark Flanagan is pretty much the biggest household name in horror at the moment that emerged out of the 2010s, to a point he's basically already solidified himself as one of the biggest names of horror that, again, emerged out of 2010s. Not just with his other Stephen King stuff, being Gerald's Game and Doctor Sleep, which is a sequel to The Shining, but it's also way more well known for his stuff on television, or more specifically with Netflix, with stuff like Midnight Mass or Midnight Club, The Fall of the House of Usher, or something like The Haunting of either Hell House or Bly Manor. And this time he goes into more fantastical elements with more of akin to his dramatic stuff that he's usually known, and of course with his trademark Stephen King collaborations with let's just say with something like Gerald's Game and Doctor Sleep, and this time doing an adaptation of a short story from a novella that was released only just 5 years ago. What's so incredibly intriguing about this movie that the movie is being told in reverse order, as in the movie is essentially almost like Memento, except the order is a lot more consistent. Whereas Memento, it does swing back and forth to the point where we're literally at most like at the midpoint of the movie. For Life of Chuck, it's done, again, a lot more consistently in that movie, as in it starts literally when the main character is pretty much dying and the universe is dying, and the first act essentially starts off in his childhood and his very formative years, and the middle section is basically him as an adult just enjoying life as it is, which I found very interesting, because if they played it as a usual chronological movie, the movie would it definitely ended in a bummer with the universe just disintegrating and him just dying, which again, a bit of a bummer, but I thought maybe it's a creative decision, but it turns out no, it's basically formatted like that in the Stephen King book, If It Bleeds, in the section of Life of Chuck, which again, very interesting. I'm not sure what the logic behind it from Stephen King was. I'm guessing it's not to be a complete bummer of an ending, but again, this is some pretty unorthodox way to essentially present the story as it is, as in present the end first and treat it as a beginning, then end it where the movie would essentially enter into the second act, which is again very interesting. So, with that in mind, if I say first act when I actually probably meant the third act, or third act when I probably meant the first act, so apologies if I kind of muddle things up a little bit in this review, but second act is second act, so at least that's kind of sorted itself out here. And the tone for the first third of the movie, which is Act 3, but it's also Act 1 if you when you watch it, or what's Act 3. It feels, it's basically essentially a post-apocalyptic movie about the entire world just essentially crumbling as the universe is just completely going into blankness again. Chuck does not appear in this movie besides the big billboards, some TV advertisements and all that. Like, it kind of gives off this omnipresence, like, tone of the film, essentially. Like, you kind of know something's a little bit off about it, like, it does say, thank you for 39 great years. And you're there like, 39? Probably, if you say, and probably maybe a bit of a birthday prank or something like, look, I brought a whole billboard to celebrate your birthday and some TV ads and all that. But I feel like during the apocalypse, it feels somewhat omnipresent. Not necessarily weird, like, you know, something's a little bit off about this. Like, why 39? Maybe 40 or 50? Or like a milestone birthday or anniversary. And he's also, again, the movie does establish that he's an accountant, and he's got that from his alcoholic granddad he grew up with. Again, particularly, you only get to see him by the second act of the film, which is like 40 minutes in the film, or like probably just over 40% into the movie or something like that. Like, it feels weirdly a bit omnipresent at best. It feels somewhat off. It feels like you remake Truman Show, but have it in the perspective of one of the extras in the movie, as in kind of in on the fact that the entire world is constructed around him. As in, I think if you apply that logic into that movie, with the world ending when he dies, it somewhat reminds me of that quote from the anime series Ergo Proxy, where I think the main character Ariel did say, essentially, I wonder the entire world was formed on the day I was born, and the entire world will crumble when I die. I think she said something along the lines in the early episodes of the series. I felt like, oh, really profound philosophical quote, like, if the world ends when he dies, like the entire world is somewhat tailored around him, and he's completely blissfully unaware about it, which is again a really intriguing way to go around that idea. But the movie's omnipresence and tone thankfully lighten up throughout the next two acts, as in Act 2, then Act 1. As in, chronologically, this would be Act 3 by the end of the movie, but it's Act 1 at the end of the movie. The movie's tone definitely does lighten up in the movie. Does lighten up quite a considerable bit, and the omnipresence is pretty much all but gone at this point. The second act is pretty much Chuck as an adult, as an accountant, and he stops at town square to dance at some busker who was doing some drum music, and dances along to a girl he finds along just watching him, and dances along. And he just, afterwards, they kind of meet up with the busker and say, no, you should be part of a trio, you can work with us. And he politely declines, so he just, at the end of it, he kind of just wanders around town just thinking about that moment, like, why did he dance to that music by the busking drum, and how did he become so good at it? And it does, Act 1, does greatly explain to the audience how did he become like such a really good dancer, and how he has such a pretty fine taste in music, as he essentially, in fact, Act 1, as it does explore his childhood, particularly with his upbringing with his alcoholic granddad and depressed grandmother, and of course some really tragic circumstances that involved his parents. And of course, there was this massive subplot where he joins a dance club in school, which is again a really nice, really touching part of the movie, and a lot of character growth where he's a really bright and smart kid, but is quivering and pretty unconfident about himself. But particularly in prom scene where it begins with him kind of whimpering a little bit, like, oh, I don't do it because I broke my leg or something, but. When he does dance, he pretty much took over the dance floor, like, with his moves. Like, even though he may be quivering and shy, but he does essentially suit up and just save the day for himself, which is again some really interesting stuff, and particularly in the family dynamics of him and his grandparents, which is again very interesting. Who he sees his grandparents essentially now as his parents a lot now. Even though that they do hold a lot of secrets away from him, but in a sense that is done in a way to protect him, not to essentially alienate him. What's also great about this movie, not just the writing, which is again really good, and also the narration done by Nick Offerman, who narrates the entire movie, pretty much almost like he was reading off the book of If It Bleeds, and also the segment of Life of Chuck, which is again. Really good narration, like his deep, very deep voice, and sounds like I've been drinking a little bit of bourbon, and I sound somewhat coherent about it. Yeah, again, some really good stuff from Nick Offerman. Tom Hiddleston, despite being consistently the most consistent and most prominent, being the second act of the movie, he does pop up here and there, but mostly as flash forwards or flashbacks. Or in his deathbed in the third act in the movie. Again, following the movie somewhat chronologically is a tiny bit difficult given how the movie's played out. But also, I really like the performance of the teacher being portrayed by Shitawa Ikuvo. If I mispronounce his name, I do apologize. Essentially playing a teacher who's struggling with the end of the world along with his students and as well as the students' parents in the film. As he's pretty much just walking around, he spends quite a lot of it in his neighbour's, talking to his neighbour, and pretty much, well, the world's literally going to die, and him literally seeing the world crumble. Like, TV reception goes out, the internet goes out, the phone signals go out. And of course, he navigates and finds his ex-girlfriend, who now works as a nurse, and they pretty much share the same thing, as in, well, let's stay together one last time as the world crumbles. Like, you see him literally crumble like the rest of the world. Like, he gives off a really darn good, vulnerable performance. Like, he's really that good at it. Like, he is just a broken down person where the world is literally going to break down permanently, which is again a really terrifying concept, but he handles it pretty well. And Tom Hiddleston, despite being most prevalent in the second act, he is again a bright shiny beacon in that movie, particularly after a bit of a downer of the first act, third act, you know, the first third of the movie. Again, trying stay on top of the timelines here. And performances, again, an ensemble cast. Karen Gillan as the nurse and the ex-wife of Marty. There's also Mark Hamill, who plays the grandfather, who's essentially an accountant and an alcoholic. Again, he does a really great performance there and talks him into being an accountant. Again, some incredible performances in this movie. And of course, just great performances all in all. Life of Chuck is definitely a very unorthodox film, I'd say. The movie is chronologically, may not be to everyone's appetite, particularly being told in reverse with the acts. And of course the movie, particularly with the character, is joyful and it's definitely wonderful. It's definitely uplifting, and particularly in the third act, which is played in at the beginning of the film. Even though it may seem terrifying, you do find a lot of joy. You do find something a bit whimsical about it, somewhat a bit awe-inspiring. Like, the movie somewhat contains multitudes at best. Like, you feel like this is a part of your world. Like, you kind of live that life, as in the life of Chuck, which is, again, really interesting stuff. Like, the writing is again really good. The acting of Tom Hiddleston and T.O.T. is all incredible in this movie, and Karen Gillan as well. And the film's ideas are pretty brilliant, like him in a dance club and him dancing when he is an accountant opposite the busker. Again, some really nice and pretty insightful stuff, in my opinion. Even though it may be a bit of a daunting, despite a pretty daunting beginning of the film, like the beginning act, but I feel like at the end of the day, I feel like Life of Chuck is definitely going to go down as a cult classic. So I'm feeling an 8 out of 10 for Life of Chuck. So, what do you think of Life of Chuck? Let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe to my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Letterboxd and Threads, and dislike Wells. And bye.